In this video, we're going to have a look at responsive layout in a UX component. So in this UX, we have a panel navigator, a panel card, two containers, and they're just normal containers. And inside each container, we have a number of controls. And you'll notice that each control does not have the toggle brake turned on. That's so that the responsive layout can set the width of each container, and the flow of the controls will change according to the width they're in. Now the container, I don't have any container width set. Let's see, I can just pull this over and show you that. The width of each control is set, however, because that's normally what happens. If you want to start controlling the flow of these things, you most likely have a width set on these things. You can, if you want controls to be full width, 100% of whatever they're sitting in, you would just put that into a container by itself, and that would be sitting on a line by itself, so it could be sitting on a container by itself, so that's fine. Each one of these controls has a width set. And let's go down and have a look at the responsive layout settings now. So here I've got a number of rules defined. I've got 5 rules defined. One of them's for Android, but I'm not going to be using that right now. We're just going to stick with the iOS devices. So I've got 2 rules for the iPhone, one for portrait and one for landscape, and 2 for iPad, portrait and landscape once again. So if I edit a rule here, all I'm saying is the device is an iPhone and the screen orientation is portrait, as opposed to the landscape rule. So what we're doing here is I've got 2 actions set up for each one of these. 2 actions are set up, so they'll both apply to any rule that fires here. So on container 1, when the iPhone is in portrait mode, container 1 will fire, and we're setting a width of 350 pixels. Container 2 is setting a width of 300 pixels. Those are virtually the same, so there's no reason why they couldn't both be 350, because they're essentially the same. What this means is, if you remember, our controls have a width of 250 pixels, so this will only allow 1 control per line. So when the iPhone is in portrait, we're going to see both containers, all 8 controls, set up one underneath the other. Now, when we go landscape, our container 1 has a width of 700 pixels, which means 2 controls can flow across the screen, and then the other 2 controls will be sitting underneath them. So that's in container 1, whereas in container 2, our width is set at 300 pixels, so container 2, the 4 controls in there will not flow, and will be set underneath one another. Now, the next one, iPad, the container 1 for portrait iPad is going to be set at 600 pixels wide, which means we should be able to see 2 controls per line. Container 2 is set at 300 pixels, which means they're going to be underneath one another. And in landscape, we have a lot of screen on the width for an iPad, but I'm going to force the items in container 1 to flow, not to flow across, but rather to be stacked one on top of the other, and in container 2 they can flow across for at least 2. I think that'll work out well. So I'm going to go and set this up now so that you can actually see it on the iPad. So here we have my iPad displayed, and you'll see that the first set of controls in container 1 are split up so that they are going across across for 2 controls and down for 2 controls. And that's because we've got our, as you can see, we've got our width set at 600, and the container 2 is set up for a width of 300, so that does not allow any controls to flow across, but rather they're all stacked on top of each other, because the container in here is set at 300 pixels. And if we move to landscape orientation, so let's do that. So what do we expect for landscape? So let's just go and have a look. So our very first container for landscape for the iPad is set up for 300. So I would expect the moving to landscape that these four controls, text 1 to text 4 in container 1, will be displayed underneath one another because there's not enough room at 300 pixels to display more than one control. Whereas the second container I expect 2 across, 2 down because our width is going to be set at 600. So let's see, I'm going to rotate now, and I'll just pull that back in your view, and that's exactly what happened. So we've got our four controls sitting underneath one another, and we've got our four controls 2 across sitting there. Now let's have a look to see what's going to be happening on the iPhone now. So here we are on an iPhone. We've got our two rules set up here. iPhone Portrait, which says the first container, let's go to container 1, it's going to be set at 350 pixels, and container 2 is going to be set at 350 pixels. So what we expect to see is all controls sitting underneath one another, and that's exactly what we've got. Now when we go to landscape, what do we expect? We expect our container 1, so text controls 1 to 4, to be spread across the screen, and container 2 will still be underneath one another. So let's rotate this, and that's exactly what we've got. Let's come down a little bit. So that's what we're seeing here. We've got text 1 to 4 flowing across the screen as much as they can to fill up that space of what was it again? 700 pixels wide, and then container 2 is going to stay at one underneath the other at 300 pixels wide. And so, again, since our controls are 250 pixels wide, that's as much as they can go. So I believe this is the effect that you're looking for. I think this will work out quite well. Thanks for having a look.